It's Luke from your 50 Shades of Sales podcast. Before each episode, we just wanted to warn our listeners that there may be some swear words or choice language used in any one of our episodes. It's not intentional, we don't mean it to offend, but we wanted to forewarn each of our listeners. Please do enjoy. Hello, welcome to another episode of our 50 Shades of Sales podcast series. For those of you who don't know, this is where we'll be giving you a no-holds-barred and alternative view of the challenging yet rewarding life of a sales development representative. And for those of you who do know, welcome back. It's been a little while. Now, in this episode, we're going to be discussing the pitfalls within the sales industry that lead to mental health issues, to which there are an awful lot within modern-day society, and how its daily demands can actually begin to drive negative performance, which is something, again, that we're always trying to avoid within the sales world. And joining me to do so is one of my favorite people on the planet, an ex-colleague of mine in the training department of Durham Lane. One of the main reasons that I stayed enrolled when the going really did get tough. I call her the Gaviscon to my heartburn. It's Alison Freer. How are we?
Well, Luke, I'm absolutely bowled over by what an introduction. I'm going to remember that one. That is a definite Mr. Robinson quote there, right there.
Yeah, I worked on that one for a little while. I thought, how can I get this introduction right? And it just made sense.
Well, I'm really pleased to be here. It's just lovely to be in conversation with you again.
Yeah, and to which we've had some brilliant conversations, and did even before this as well. So much so that I wish we were recording some of it. But yeah, I just wanted to have a look at the sales world, and I thought, who better than to talk it through than yourself, because I know that we chatted extensively in our time working together as well, in terms of weekly coaching sessions, which sometimes became weekly therapy sessions. But salespeople themselves face an unrelenting expectation to perform at a high level all the time. So coupled that with an environment that's filled with potential rejection and mental health pitfalls, I did a little bit of research, and it seems that most companies give salespeople the tools that they need to succeed. So strong sales process, things like scripts, KPIs, a repeatable way to fill their pipeline, a repeatable methodology to help them hit their targets. But although a strong sales process helps drive desired company results, rarely does it actually include a mental health component to protect these salespeople and their well-being as well, because we're continuously bombarded with client objections, the fear, anxiety of missing targets, getting yelled at by sales managers, or the worst case scenario, the fear of getting fired, particularly within this climate as well. So sales organizations and sales leaders I believe that they're missing a massive opportunity that comes with improving the mental health within their sales teams. And these studies that I've tried to have a look at as well consistently show improved well-being leads to increased productivity, engagement, and retention, particularly of staff. So in today's and more even uncertain climate, I wanted us to discuss some ways in which possibly a sales leader can start protecting or even improving the mental health within their sales team. And I guess the best place to start, or the first question would be, how important do you think the trust between the sales manager and the sales rep is when it comes to tackling mental health in sales?
Well, you wouldn't be surprised for me to say, well, it's absolutely essential. And in these times, we're talking even more about physical safety, but really in any team or any high-performing team, psychological safety is the thing that's absolutely key and critical. That means that it must be okay for people to raise different ideas, opinions, to say if they have a vulnerability, and for it to be respected. It doesn't mean to say that it has to be resolved, but it has to be possible for people to raise that. And when it comes to trust, I guess that has to start right back at the beginning, ideally in the hiring process, and you build that trust through modeling the kinds of empathic behaviors that you would expect to see within the team. I think for sales as a profession, my experience has been, having had the privilege of working with so many sales specialists, sales leaders, there's a tendency to almost adopt an armor of steel. And in some respects, that's quite a helpful coping strategy to deal with those things that you've talked about, the higher potential for rejection or ghosting or whatever behaviors people use to avoid being sold to, because it's kind of a natural position for quite quite a lot of people that we might be trying to engage with. So that trust is, I always use that analogy, I think we've talked about it before, I'm okay, you're okay.
Yeah.
And I like when you're doing well, I like the you following the processes, and it's okay to say, I don't know about this, I'm not sure about that, or I am feeling this. There's equally a fine balance, I think, between support and challenge, because in a high-performing culture and the most successful sales organizations, they encourage challenge and stimulus, and they back that up with right and ready support when it's needed. So I guess the watch out in starting to explore mental health, mental well-being and resilience is to watch out for being over nurturing and kind of holding people back and being overprotective, but to find ways of giving people responsibility for their own actions, involving them early doors in speaking with clients or other teams around a business, so that they're working on real stuff, and then then it's possible for them to build trust because they're being trusted, and we mirror behavior. So if it's towards behavior, I'm involving you, I'm inviting you to give your opinion, I'm genuinely respecting that, even if you've only been with the business for a short period of time. I'm especially respecting it, even if you're younger than me, if you're different from me. That models the right kind of nurturing behavior that makes it okay and more likely to be psychologically safe. So I think, yeah, I hope that makes sense. But for me, resilience is a long-term thing. It's not just a batten down the hatches and tough it out. It's a temporary fix. So you build trust by modeling that. And the other thing is possibly particularly hard for people in sales, because it's all about achievement, is to be okay to disclose when things haven't gone well, and doing that with a learning intent. Just to brush it off or just dismiss it, or to worse than that, belittle it, is just toxic. And that's where the rot can start to set in, and it creates a psychologically unsafe and unstable environment, and you would then start to see counterproductive behaviours.
Yeah, you make a good point there. It's a little bit like when you hear certain friends who gamble. You'll only ever hear when things have gone right. Yeah, oh, I've got this win, I've got this win. Where rarely in the sales world do we ever talk about our failures. Or you know, you'll just you'll sweep that under the carpet if it's a close loss, right? Nobody ever really hears about it. It just fizzles out. But listen, I've got something else in the pipeline. Let me talk about that. Yeah. And you make a really good point around that coat of steel, because I think the sales environment generally is quite a bit, it's a bit of a chest beating place to be, right? Certainly a competitive place to be. And going all the way back to when your original point around vulnerability, it's very difficult for, you know, young-blooded competitive male to show that they're vulnerable and they're not having a good time. And I wonder how we can, I don't know, because you can talk about this culture and it's an open culture and it's a trust culture, but it's how do we get people to come forward with, you know what, I'm really not comfortable, and it's showing those vulnerabilities. I don't know whether it's whether women are better at it than men. I just wonder whether there's a way that we can help eat that out from people.
I think you've highlighted that there can be a tendency for masculine-driven behaviours to perpetuate that coat of steel and armour. I've seen women behave in a similar way, so women can equally adopt masculine behaviours and try and present as impervious. But I think it's watching out for the behaviour patterns. The more diverse you are as an organisation in gender and age and any, every other diversity, neurodiversity, that helps, because you're going to have to rub along and find ways of rubbing along. But admission of vulnerability, again, needs carefully handling, particularly in the manager-team relationship, where if you're bestowed with a leadership mantle, you do have a responsibility to provide hope and vision and, equip people to create an environment for success. You also do need to acknowledge when things don't go well, and to acknowledge that you might have had experiences of you yourself contributing to the fact that it didn't go well. One of the things that I think particularly long established leaders in any organization, especially in sales, need to think about is if they've been in the game for decades, particularly once we get to our 40s and beyond, we can kind of think we've got the formula that has got us there, and it's the recipe for future success. The most potent tool at that point is high self-awareness. And I was just speaking to a sales leader the other day, and he said, I really shouldn't have allowed this one through. It wasn't the right deal, but I recognised that because, where we were at with COVID and the business, it was so compelling to say yes. So, I think that's a rare thing to hear that. It's not saying I completely messed up, but it is about saying that could have gone better. I should have done that differently, or actually to say, right now I'm probably finding this tougher than I've ever found it before. And that gives permission for people to open up. But also to your point, it's how do people come forward? In my experience and working with the Durham Lane team, some of the most courageous people were the ones that said, do you know what? I think I need to look at this. And it was almost like they'd shut a room on a scary door or something, or a cellar, and they didn't want to go in. And actually, when they learn just to open the door with a bit of support, there's always a way forward. You don't always know what the end game is. But I think just about every person that I came across who ever did that in your business or elsewhere found it hard but useful, and they came back stronger.
Yeah. So I think the responsibility does lie with the leaders first as well to really promote, or start the discussion around mental health. They don't necessarily have to talk about their own personal experiences, but being able to talk through what challenges that they've faced in ways that they learned to overcome them throughout their sales career. Well, actually, I shouldn't have breached this one, but what I've learned from that is, and then this is what I avoid doing going forward. I think for me would be, it's not so much leading by example in mental health, but, having people be able to come and know that it's okay to do that. I think it does start with the leaders themselves, right?
It does. And and I think coming back to, often if there are a lot of masculine behaviors, it can seem like a really hard thing to do, but there is that leadership mantle. Also though, even if haven't officially got it in your job title, you're not lead, head, whatever, manager, you can still model it around colleagues. So the more that it's built in right from the get-go, early career stage, and I think the one thing that we have the opportunity to do in these times is, if you hadn't have felt vulnerable in the past, you probably have done at some point in this year. Mm-hmm. So there's a more open agenda about it. But it is about recognizing that mental health it's as important as anything else. And I think we're seeing it left, right and centre right now. So if anything, there's an opportunity to make it okay to talk about. I think it's the construction industry, which is also, I think its demographics would mirror perhaps, some of the mature sales environments, a lot of particularly men and in, sort of 30s, 40s onwards. They have had a huge challenge with male mental health, to the point where they've had a high incidence of suicide or extreme mental health conditions. And it was only through senior men in that industry starting to talk about their own challenges that they've seen a sea change. They're not there yet by any stretch, but they're tackling it. And the other thing that I think is a great idea, you're a trained first aider, but mental health first aid. So what do you do if somebody feels comfortable enough with you, whether you're a colleague, a manager, you're in HR, you're in another part of the business, you're in, I don't know, the cafe, and somebody discloses something to you, it's an honour that they've chosen to, but it can also, where do I go with this? You don't have to solve it, but so long as you know where to signpost somebody and how to deal to get them to the very next step.
Mm-hmm. And you make a good point around the construction industry as well. I had a bit of a situation, it was Christmas time, I think, just last year. Bumped into an ex teammate of mine, big grizzly man, right? You're talking 6'8", part of a very, well, him and his brother were very, very tough players. And I chatted to him in a pub, bumped into him, and we got chatting, and he himself opened up that he'd really been struggling, and he's always worked on building sites. He's worked in as an electrician, etc., etc. And he admitted himself that he had an issue with drugs and addiction, but also a real struggle with his own mental health. And he said that once he'd actually come clean and started talking to people, and started to get help with this, he in turn became almost the voice that everybody would listen to on site. So you'd have all of these young guys looking up to him and saying, well, you know what? I'm glad that you said that because I'm really struggling. What advice can you give me? Right? And I just said to him, that is what males need. They need a big, scary, angry man like you who's able to stand up and show his vulnerability, because if he can, then anybody can. So anyway, I said, listen, you need to start a group off. You absolutely need to do it. And from there, he then started a group, a mental health group called Menkind. So every Thursday they got together. I won't go through the logo because he's got ginger hair and it takes balls to talk. Put the two together, you can see what we got. But listen, it started to gain real traction. And then at a rugby dinner, he had a real crippling fear of public speaking. So me, Mr. Extrovert, helped him through it. And he actually stood up, and then there was so much sponsorship and feedback from the talk that we did that it's just gone from strength to strength. So it just shows that if you can be the example for some people, then it can just absolutely snowball. Because of COVID and things like that, and being able to get together in no bigger than groups of 6, it's slowed down a little bit. But I think we're trying to regain momentum by doing Zoom calls and things like that. But yeah, just having somebody say this and then somebody being able to see it, I think is absolutely great.
Yeah.
So we talked about having those mental health first aiders as well. What more do you think sales organizations and departments could be doing to improve the mental well-being of their sales rep, do you think?
Well, do you know, when you're talking about how many organizations really try hard to do the right thing, but the training and sales process, the tools and techniques, all of that great models and frameworks and systems and processes. The one that I'd really crucially add in there is we used it, sometimes we couch it as time management, personal performance. It's things like understanding what happens to us in a stress response situation. You'll remember we talk about that quite often in some of our leadership programs and training and workshops. The amount of pressure I feel I'm under might be different to how much pressure you feel you're under with the same task. And you might feel you can cope with it and I can't. The more that you put that understanding and awareness into sales professionals' toolkit, it doesn't stop them having those challenging moments. What it does bring, though, is the resourcefulness to be able to cope with them, either themselves or help others to do so when they do emerge. So it's knowing, watching out for your warning signs. So first things first, if we're really overloaded in pressure, probably mental warning signs, the things that we would previously have been able to do no problem, suddenly become a bigger deal, or we make mistakes that we wouldn't ordinarily have made. The other thing that then starts to develop is the behavioural warning signs. That's where in a team it's really important. One of the hardest things that has come with virtual working is just being able to see those little warning signs in ourselves and each other that we're emotionally not where we want to be, And of course, the physical warning signs are the last ones to kick in, because by that time our bodies have been in stress, even though we might not think it. So in answer to your question, I think something around that, it's the same as admitting vulnerability. It's also giving, though, tools and techniques. What are your coping strategies when you realize, you're just not getting the conversations that you want? Are you noticing that you're all hunched over your desk if you're constantly calling? Are you, in the days of face-to-face meetings, when they come back again, are you screeching to a halt at the meeting without really having given yourself time? So what are the little things that you can do? Build that into the toolkit in sales departments, and also publicizing for those moments when you really don't know where to turn. What is the very first step you could take? Who's available for you to talk to, either within the business or outside of it? Even and acknowledging you might not want to talk to a colleague. And I guess the other thing is equipping all of the team with that, the ability to coach each other. And again, that doesn't need to be the mantle of a manager. It's an essential part from the get-go. And, I think there's many examples of success in Durham Lane and Durham Lane client teams, where it's about building teams of teams, coaches of coaches. It's an essential part of a sales professional's toolkit to be able to do that. And then you make it possible to nip any, really more significant issues in the bud, to help somebody over that little peak, just as you would if you were training somebody on a rugby pitch, or you were training somebody on an athletics track. Those little marginal gain adjustments can be built into the toolkit.
Yeah, I really like the knowing what the next steps are, because I think a lot of organizations, certainly ones that are growing and scaling, they don't tend to have that as, let's make this available. This is where we're trying to get to, in terms of, well, actually, we need these great people to be able to get to them. And those next steps and knowing what to do next, I think that is the difficult part. And I think if you've got a clear pathway for somebody, if they can't then go to their colleague first, what is then the next step? If it does get too much. So yeah, I'd say that's really, really good, and something that in the last year and a half or so we've managed to get right as an organization. We've got the numbers, we've got the support, we've got the cards around. So it's that little subliminal message that, all right, okay, yeah, it is there. That's the number that I need to call. This is the advice I'm able to get.
Yeah, and and remember, appreciate it as a courageous step, as courageous as, I don't know, some extreme sports or something like that, or it's about knowing where to go, and knowing that you've got that in your toolkit, respecting that even if you don't consider it to be necessary in your own practice, that is about diversity, appreciating that others may have a different experience and perspective, and holding that true, and then enabling them to work their own path with support. And, I know you often have talked about, and Richard talks about, positive spirals. Mental health is possibly one of the hardest things to get back onto a positive spiral, because it feeds off the fear, anxiety, and gremlins. It absolutely loves those. So it is about finding little mental coping strategies, reframing, or if the head isn't working, that's back to, we talked about nature, outdoors. You just physically move yourself somewhere different. It's almost like kickstarting a car. It's doing something different with your body and your physical environment, so that your head has got time to be distracted and come back.
Yeah, and that physical release, I suppose, for me has always been present. It's always been part of my life, and up until recently, I've been okay mental health wise, but we'll get into that in a second. But I found, and I even question myself, it is no wonder that people get themselves into the trouble that they do if they don't have exercise to be able to help them do that. We say it's a cliche and it does this and it releases this endorphin, it does that. That's because we're not lying. We're not lying. Feeling the elements, actually breathing in some fresh air, moving your body, yeah, feeling your heartbeat, actually raising your body temperature and sweating and almost leaning into your pain. If it is really that tough, then use it. Lean into that pain. If that extra rep needs to get out, then great, lean into it. I've never really had that there until recently, and I've seen my performance go like that. Just because in terms of, right, what am I trying to stamp out here? What am I going to use? One foot in front of the other and just keep driving. It absolutely makes a difference. And we're not saying that you have to be an Olympic lifter here, but it's a case of getting out for that walk, right? Getting out on your bicycle, right? Or getting into the swimming pool. Swimming for me is one of those things where it's 1, 2, 1, 2. And then basically I found sometimes that I do 40 lengths and stop and go, I didn't think of anything else there. It's almost like achieving that complete mindfulness, right? And all that nothingness, because you're not concentrating on anything other than the stroke and on the breath, because it's a counting system. And even if you can reduce it down to something as simple as that, right? And that cadence, then it just brings your mind and settles it down, because, as I say, the mind and the gremlins are a scary place, right? And just going on to like the actual present day for myself. I mean, I'd recently had a crucible moment in my personal life, which I think probably directly affected my mental state at work more than I actually believed. And although work was a great distraction, because, okay, I can distract my mind, I can distract the gremlins, it was not the answer. So I know that you've written a bit of an article on this before, and you're more experienced, I suppose, within that space, but can you explain what a crucible moment is and why you think it's important for sales organizations specifically to either A, spot them, or B, support their people through theirs?
Yeah. Well, crucible moments were a concept I came across when I was reading a book, which I've probably gone on about to various people, How to Have a Good Day by Caroline Webb. And she talked about crucible moments. And if you look them up, they're quite well written about. So crucibles back in the day were, and still are, the physical vessels, often made out of stone, that artisans used to melt down, bits of metal and create something beautiful or useful out of. So they were transformative vessels. Yeah. So if we apply that metaphor to life, there are times when a crucible moment is when we feel tested, almost that the heat is so intense we can't touch it. It's testing us more than we could have ever imagined or believed could happen in our lives. So whether that's health, relationships, finance, business, whatever it is, it's initially so hot it's scary. Mm-hmm. And the thing about it is it's rarely quickly done. So it's a longer process to get through it. And so it's accepting that you're probably in for quite a long haul, and having to basically go with the process. So crucible moments, in a human sense, are when we will emerge transformed, physically, mentally, emotionally. We're still us, still there, although we will have realized, it's what Buddhists would call a realization. Mm-hmm. We go from just kind of knowing something to actually getting it, and more than that, changing our outlook, behavior, lifestyle, whatever it is. We put permanent changes in place. Not easy. We probably learn the hard way about what to say yes and no to, or we say yes and no to different things, possibly different people. So back to a sales environment, as we go through life, it's probably not a great thing to say, but it's almost inevitable that every one of us will experience some kind of crucible moment in our lives. Some people experience more than others. I remember once working with a Syrian colleague, and she was describing to me the experience of living in exile and her family back home, and she hadn't been able to make contact with them for 3 months. Didn't know when she was going to be able to get back. She talked about the journey she'd made to get here, and I just thought, I cannot imagine having to do that. Cannot imagine it. So crucible moments tend to be the things that we have not imagined having to deal with, or we know that other people go through them but don't want to look at them ourselves. So any organization, and particularly sales organizations, you should expect that somebody somewhere will probably go through one, if not a number of crucible moments. You can't plan for all eventualities, although I think it is to look at how do you respond when they are revealed to you, and back to what's the very next step. So I'm not suggesting that any business should be able to deal with extreme cases of illness or mental health breakdowns or financial collapse, or whatever it is. However, they should be able to support that person through their first steps. And as you've courageously said, it is possible for that crucible moment, that transition through, which can last a period of time. I'm not putting any time on it, but it's certainly not days. It's normally weeks to months, possibly sometimes longer.
I bet you people going through theirs would love to have a time frame put on it.
Yeah. Well, you know, the most intense heat, if you remember, you know, we talked about the change curve, which is less of a process and more of different states. That state of pit of confusion is just a really awful place to be. It's like, you know, it's just murky and it's just so oppressive. What you can count on is you are wired as a human being to not want to be. You don't want to stand next to the intense heat. You don't want to be in that washing machine. So eventually, even those that really get dragged down will normally find a way of getting out of it if they've had the right kind of little bits of support and they know that there's a bigger range of support there. The challenge is in crucible moments, people aren't always ready to accept the full program of support to begin with. So it is about step-by-step, bite-sized chunks. I wouldn't put a time on it because some people might be through it in weeks, some in months, and possibly for crucible moments, it will always be part of your fibre. It's like the rings in a tree, and that year or that time that you were going through that crucible moment forms a ring in your being that is always there, but in time you build new layers on top. Or, as I think I mentioned to you, a really good friend and mentor of mine describes it as chapters in the book. You know, the bit where you're watching a movie or you're reading a novel and you think, how on earth are they going to get out of that? And yet they do. So it's trusting, as one of my coaches once said to me, that you are creative, resourceful, you're whole, you're not broken beyond repair, but it's tough. And you will find a way through.
Yeah, I felt like I was at the chapter in the book where there was an explosion. I was hanging on by a fingernail, you know, and even if you're right next to that heat and you want to get away from it, you don't know quite. It's like there's something just holding you back and keeping you right next to all of that intense heat, and it's so confusing. But I think I'm about 3/4 of the way through the book now. If we're still talking about chapters, and yeah, you're almost picking up the pieces and dealing with the aftermath, but actually trying to find peace with the whole thing as well. And it's really good that you say, like, you are not broken. This is not, you know, this is fixable, right? It's not unfixable. It can make a difference. But I think, yeah, having people recognize that if we can help one person with this podcast, and who maybe recognizes a crucible moment or when they had one, and actually, did I deal with that properly? Probably not. But yeah, I think it's a really good thing for us to be able to talk about as well, because it's absolutely key, right? And if there are any little quick wins that can be achieved, maybe day to day, in helping salespeople cope with the stresses of the day, do you have, you know, top little bits of advice in terms of coping mechanisms, or even if it's just little pieces of advice to help them get throughout the day?
Well, do you know, we were talking about before, you know, coping strategy is just move or do something. And whether you're in an office or a home office or a car office, whatever your office is, first things first, things that you can do on the spot are something that you might have heard me call triangular breathing. And it's called triangular breathing because it's 3 of 3, but whether you practice yoga or Pilates, but simply on the spot, breathing in, pausing for 3 and out for 3, it's working on the body. Even if if you're in a meeting, you can't move, or you feel you shouldn't, or whatever, you can do breathing on the spot, and nobody needs to know about it. And the other thing that you remember we talked about a lot is grounding. So even though we're just head and shoulders news at 10 shots at the moment, a lot on Zoom, keep your feet on the floor, even if you're in virtual meetings, because again, opens up the airwaves, allows you to breathe. It allows you to calm down any stress response that's happening enough for the brain to start working in a helpful way again. And it fights off the gremlins and all of the kind of reptilian chimp brain stuff that Steve Peters talks about. It doesn't solve everything, doesn't necessarily, make it go away, but it helps you take the next steps. It helps you then think, do I really need to seek some support on this? Or have I got enough in my toolkit to deal with it? You can't force somebody to reveal a crucible moment to you. The best you can do is create the environment where, should they need to, they know where to turn in the first instance. So in answer to your question, it's that. It's also remember teams of teams. And I heard some research the other day. I think CBI, apparently during lockdown, individual productivity has been found to rise. So people are, have less kind of interruptions on their day, so they're cracking through stuff. Team productivity has declined because people are missing the ability to learn and build and to stave off predictable challenges in a project or in a sales pipeline, because they're just not interacting sufficiently together. So if you're back in the office, there's a great opportunity there to keep on. That buzz, noticing what you really value in human interaction. And the other coping strategy is to have a meaningful conversation with a colleague. Watch out for too much. It's important to be able to clear out the frustration, annoyance, worry, whatever it is, he said, she said. To have a constructive conversation, a great coping mechanism is, okay, so what have you learned from that? What will be your next steps? And then you can offer advice. So again, coping strategy is those coaching colleague conversations. And then the bigger things that we've talked about in life is about health and well-being, and thinking, am I giving myself my best chance with my physical fitness, my creative pursuits? Am I giving myself the best chance of sleep, which has been quite elusive for many people? So it's looking at those maintenance strategies as well as the immediate coping strategies.
Yeah, and listen, I will 100% back up the breathing side of things. It is so amazing what you can do with one of just life's essential processes. It's something that we do and we don't even think about. But the moment that you actually think about it, and the reason that I've brought this up is because over the last 10 to 11 weeks, I've gone to the old Wim Hof method. So the Iceman Wim Hof, when he talks about the physical and both mental well-being or health benefits of cold water. So I've been into a business, but it's a bit of a movement. It's called Ice Guys Northeast, where every single Sunday at 8 p.m. we met just in a pair of shorts and we got in the North Sea. And you're in there for around 20 or 30 minutes, and my goodness, does it make you feel alive, because your body has no other. Well, it's got no other job other than to perform, right? It's cold, I need to perform. But also in relation to that cold water stuff, he also has the guided breathing, and it's a free app, and I'd suggest anybody give it a go. And it's a case of just fully in, fully out, and he teaches you how to circular breathe as well. Then there are some breath holds. Then after the breath holds, you then take in another big inhale of breath, and then you hold again. And after 2 or 3 rounds, you just drift into another dimension. And it is absolutely amazing what just breathing in and breathing out can actually do. You don't necessarily have to sit down with the app and lie on your office floor, right? If it gets to that point, do it, right? Go into a private space, sit still and breathe through it. But otherwise, I can attest to it. When you're in those, or when the heat is as hot as it possibly can be, just breathing your way out. Really, really simple. And as you said, people can't really see you do it, right? You just sat still at some point. But yeah, I would 100% recommend the breathing side of things, because physiologically people react very differently. It's fight or flight a lot of the time, and it's very quick for me. So to be able to slow that process down, or know when it's about to happen, and then breathe through it, it's just been, it's been monumental for me. So it's like a daily practice for me.
Yeah. And also what I hear is you are teaching yourself to do that. So as well as knowing when to draw in support from others, colleagues or professionals or specialists, it's also building up your own toolkit, so that you know you've got coping strategies that are just in your body and mind. You don't need anything else in that moment. And I love that you have embraced the Weinhoff method, and you're exploring that. I really, that's about always be learning and challenging yourself. If you're not so into such adventure, it's back to, as we were saying, get out for a walk every day. We still can. That's the one thing. Even in the darkest days of lockdown, you could still do. There's no such thing as bad weather. You just get the right kind of headgear and you're away, So it is about just stepping out and changing your environment, and taking that opportunity. So within the sales environment, there's great potential, and to see that upward spiral happening, to be part of it, to be part of that performance culture. And, so many of the people that I've been able to work with, colleagues and clients, they've got enormous potential. And I have found it to be a real privilege to learn from how they deal with all of these situations. More conscious conversation about it would be an amazing step forward in the sales profession, particularly in environments that have traditionally been characterized by that cloak of steel. So to find ways to keep the steeliness, which helps to challenge and move a business forward, but bring in the empathy, and bring in the honest conversations. And particularly if you are a looked up to leader, I think that can be hugely transformative.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good place to end it, to be honest. And we know it's cliche, right? It's a marketing campaign to get it out there, but the best way to improve mental health is to start having a conversation about it. Okay. But thank you for your time this morning, as well as all of your advice. Hopefully we've offered one, two, if not, the whole book of answers for somebody who might be having their crucible moment or struggling through something at the moment. And this will go a long way to changing the way that the sales environment looks at mental health, hopefully. And I want to do more and more of these and have more and more guests on. So if you do want to come back, you're more than welcome, and we can have a discussion or a wider discussion around more specific things. But thanks a lot for your time this morning, Alison.
Well, thank you, Luke. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I shall take away the Gaviscon mantle with great heart.
Brilliant. Well, we've been a little bit absent in our podcasts, so we will be back thick and fast with a couple more in the series. So tune in for those. Take care, guys.